Okay. We're here on October 13, 2004 to interview Ruffin Bailey, who's been one of the lions of the Raleigh Bar for many years. I'm Billy Trott of Young, Moore & Henderson, and with me is Robert Paschal of Young, Moore & Henderson, and we're thankful to the good work of Tina Kirby, who's taking this on videotape. Before we start, I thought I would just read into the record a brief biographical information about Ruffin Bailey's background. Obviously, I'm going to leave out a lot because it's so long, but these are some of the highlights. He was born in 1919 in Jacksonville, North Carolina, but grew up in Raleigh. His father was an attorney and had been chairman of the North Carolina Utilities Commission. Ruffin got a degree in economics and political science in 1941 from Chapel Hill, then served in World War II, and then got his JD from Chapel Hill in the famous class of 1948 that had all of those people who came back after World War II. During World War II, he served in a very dangerous capacity as an Air Force pilot flying over the hump in India, China, and elsewhere. After getting out of law school in 1948, he began practicing with his father. His father died several years later, and in 1954, Ruffin got up with Wright Dixon and formed the firm of Bailey and Dixon, which exists to this day and is a very fine and distinguished firm in Raleigh. Ruffin served 4 terms in the North Carolina Senate as a senator from Wake County from 1964 to 1972. He is particularly thanked by many for his role on the North Carolina Courts Commission from 1967 to 1975, and he served at times as chairman of that commission. He served on the board of North Carolina Citizens for Business and Industry. He was a lifelong member of the Good Shepherd Church in Raleigh, where he was on the vestry and served as senior warden. His practice was, to a good extent, involved in a lot of the things that take place in Raleigh, including a lot of work before the Utilities Commission on behalf of the transportation industry, a lot of work on behalf of the insurance industry, and he was the lobbyist and dean of the insurance industry's lobbying group as the lobbyist for the American Insurance Association. He received the 2001 Joseph Branch Professionalism Award and many other awards. There was a profile of Ruffin in 1991 in the Citizens for Business and Industry publication, and it described him in several ways that I think are very appropriate. It said he was a Southern gentleman, perhaps one of the last of the Southern gentlemen. That's a term that probably people are not going to be using too much in the future. He is very knowledgeable, and he's a very tough fighter and very tenacious. So welcome, Ruffin, and thank you for coming in on this rainy day to talk to us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
To begin the questioning, Ruffin, let me ask you about your recollection of first beginning practicing in Raleigh in 1948. And I preface this by saying that when I first started practicing, you were one of what I would call the lions of the bar in Wake County. Who were the lions of the bar when you first began practicing in 1948?
I had a lot of them. Leon Brasfield was one I remember very well. Mr. Wilbur Bunn, Mr. My memory's slipping some a little bit, but Bill Bickett was solicitor then, and Mr. Clyde Douglas Sr. was a big-time lawyer. We had Clem Holden, and of course I considered my father one of the best. I am Bailey, and we had a flock of good lawyers in Raleigh. Raleigh Bar has always been famous for having decent lawyers.
And Ruffin, when you were coming out of law school, did you know all along that you would begin practicing law with your father in Raleigh?
Did I say that again?
Did you know all along that you would practice law with your father in Raleigh?
Well, I had sort of known that, yes. I was probably the highest paid law clerk in Raleigh at that time at $225 a month. And it was a way to keep me in bread and water.
You spoke very highly of your father. Tell me some of the traits that he had that you respected so much.
Well, he had one of the quickest minds I've ever known, and he loved the Bar Association. He wrote the law for the state bar and was the first president of the state bar. And he was a real keen, interesting person, and it was a real pleasure to practice with him. He died in 1951, so I didn't have long, but it was a very, very valuable thing for me.
Now, what kind of practice did he have in those 3 years when you practiced with him?
Yeah, he had somewhat the same kind of practice that I ended up with. He represented Bankers Association. He represented various other associations. He did some lobbying. He was a corporate lawyer, I guess you would call him today. Did more business law. I don't think he ever appeared in criminal court in Wake County. But he was practicing with Clem Holden at that time, and Clem did some. So Clem was a very active lawyer then too.
Ruffin, I've heard for years about that famous class of students that you were in, who finished law school in Chapel Hill right after World War II, and I guess they accumulated people for 4 or 5 years who wanted to go to law school, and they all came back when the war ended in 1945, and everybody applied to law school. I guess it was pretty tough to get into that class, wasn't it?
Well, it didn't seem too difficult, but we had the biggest class that ever had, and of course it was an accumulation of 5 years. We had people like Terry Sanford, Dick Phillips, Bill Friday, to name a few. Then we had somebody from almost every county in North Carolina there. And that was a valuable experience. I knew somebody in just about every county seat when I started.
And Ruffin, talking about law school, was it difficult for you to make the transition from, active duty in World War II, the climactic really events of the 20th century, and then get back down to the business of being a law student? How was that transition?
Well, it worked out very well. I think everybody came into the class that year with the desire to just go to work like they'd been doing. It was a job, and we went at it in a workmanlike way, and I think the class profited by that attitude. It was not a lot of difference, and the transition was not difficult at all, because you had to stay abreast of everything. When you're in the Air Force, you were always taking some kind of course on various things, types of airplanes and things like that. So you had experience studying all during that 5 years that I was out.
What are some of your recollections of, say, Terry Sanford, who went on to be governor, or Bill Friday, who's one of the great North Carolinians, and Dixon Phillips, who was a law school dean and judge and all? What was it like? Were they happy-go-lucky, or that right away that they were going to go into politics and their various fields?
Well, we knew Terry was going to end up in politics, because he talked about it then. And he had talked about it when he was in undergraduate school. I was in the same dormitory with him at one time. So we knew he was going to be in politics. A lot of us didn't ever have any idea we would ever be in politics, and it's sort of a spur of the moment thing with most of us. But we knew that he was going to be sometime governor and then later senator, U.S. And then we had Dick Phillips. We just knew he was going to be a success because he was very brilliant. And Bill Friday was kind of an average student, and he was just kind of happy-go-lucky, but he had married well, and he had a lot of ambition. He wanted to practice law in Raleigh, but then he decided that a career at university was best, and it turned out that way. But it was really very, very interesting class. I wish I could name somebody else, but I just can't remember names enough now.
I'm very partial to Joe Moore, who was one of my senior partners when I first started practicing law.
Joe was very active in that class. We had a real active class. We had politics in the class. Everybody was running for something. So it was kind of a dogfight from time to time.
Well, tell us a little bit about your work on the Courts Commission. What were the problems that existed when that commission was set up, and what were some of the actions that you all took to remedy those problems?
Of course, I was Johnny-come-lately on the commission because it had been on operation for quite a while, about 3 or 4 years, and David Britt was chairman at the time, and they had just implemented the unified court system, and there were stages, and we were in the last stage of that. It was doing away with all of the little recorders courts and putting in the district court and putting in the Court of Appeals, and of course we added a lot of state employees, clerks of the court and so forth, so we had a big personnel problem. And one of the big problems was that we had judges that were getting old, and we decided that we would put in a mandatory retirement age on district court, superior court, and Supreme Court, and Court of Appeals as well. Then we also had some disciplinary problems, so we put in the Judicial Standards Commission, which was the one that would hear complaints against judges and would decide whether they should be disciplined or not, and throw out the bad ones and do whatever was necessary on ones that had merit. It was not an easy thing. It was not very popular with the judges to have the mandatory retirement, and it was not popular with the judges for the Standards Commission. But I think both have proven to be good milestones in our system. Of course, it's grown so much. We had about 4 or 5 district court judges in Wake County at that time. And now I don't know how many we got, but it's right many. But it's been a very successful transition from a fractured court system to a unified system.
I think that the test of time has proven that you all did a very good job at that time. It was a very forward-looking commission.
Well, we also did a retirement system for the judges. They had a retirement system where they not funded at all except by direct appropriation, and if one died, his pay stopped that day, and they had no benefits for his survivors, and that was wrong. We created a retirement system that was really in one that would entice people to go into the judiciary.
Mm-hmm. Now, tell us about your first getting together with Wright Dixon, who's one of the very well-respected lawyers as yourself in Raleigh. How did the two of you get together?
Well, I'd known Wright all his life, and his brother was a classmate of mine in high school, and when after my father died, I had more work than I could handle, and I wanted to keep it all, and so I thought of Wright. He was with Arch Allen at the time, and he and I got together and we formed a partnership that has lasted now 50 years, and we're still friends, and I have a lot of respect for him, and he does for me. So we've had a very, very close relationship over the years. It's kind of like a marriage when you get into a partnership with a single partner. And the law firms today are so different that you can't compare it really with what goes on today. But it's been a real inspiration to see the law practice develop in that firm as well as others like your firm. But we just naturally got together.
What kind of work were you doing? The same kind of work your father had been doing to a certain extent?
Well, I didn't. I lost a lot of good clients. I lost Greyhound. I lost the Bankers Association, and I lost a few others. But it was very interesting practice. I went before the Utilities Commission and represented all of the truckers in North Carolina at one time or another. And of course nowadays they're not regulated, so that's gone by the wayside. But I also had a few of the associations that he had represented, and I kept them. I later got Greyhound back, and I later got the Bankers Association back. But I had to earn them, and I did the one thing that had sent me through college, and that was union bus stations. I got them to change that and do away with union bus station and let a bus company have its own station.
Now, by union, you're not referring to a labor union of employees.
No, it means a joint depot, joint station with other bus companies, and they would run by the rules of each station, and depended on who was the dominant carrier in that station, Carolina Coach or Greyhound, as to what some of those rules were. And it had a lot of room for abuse in selling of tickets and routing of passengers. You'd be routed on a schedule that was much worse than the competitor would give if it fit the rules.
Hmm.
And they had some that were atrocious. But we got rid of the Union bus station.
Ruffin, I'm intrigued with what your perceptions are of the practice of law in Raleigh in the 1950s and 60s when you were coming of age as a lawyer. What do you recall about the nature of the bar at that time?
Well, Wake County Bar has always been a group of real congenial and intelligent young lawyers and older lawyers. I felt like the practice of law in Raleigh had a higher standard than any place I ever saw. I know everybody expected you to tell them the truth. Everybody expected to rely on what you said. You couldn't practice law like that today because there are too many gimmicks that would cause you to almost be guilty of malpractice by oral agreements. But you could trust everybody in the Raleigh Bar. Possibly one or two was a little less trustworthy, but they were known very well by the rest of the bar, and so the bar took care of that. It was a real pleasant experience. It was a lot of hard work, but it was a pleasant experience. It was a lot different than today. You didn't have your computers. We had manual typewriters at first, and then we got to the electric typewriter. Then we went on later to the computers and so forth, but it was quite a transition.
Now, I've heard that a lot of lawyers worked every Saturday morning in those days. Was that a fairly common practice?
Yeah, every Saturday you had to put in at least a half a day, and probably all day. A lot of people, it's the only time they could come to town was on Saturday, and you'd see clients in the morning, and you'd have work to do that you had to get ready for the next week. But your work product was much slower to get out than it is today. You put it in a day and then you get it today, but you give a secretary then a long dictation of a brief, and it would take a long time for her to make a perfect copy of what she had been given. But I was fortunate. I had a girl that my father had, and she kind of trained me on how to dictate and how to get things done.
Who was that, Ruffin?
Well, her name was Nancy. She was unmarried at that time, and then she married right away after my father died. And right now, that name slipped by me. I'm sorry.
Okay. That's okay. Now, I heard that a lot of lawyers would come in on Saturdays. There wouldn't even be air conditioning. Sometimes you'd have a big old electric fan, and lawyers would be in their offices with an electric fan on, still wearing a coat and tie on a Saturday in the summertime in Raleigh, North Carolina. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, my father wore a coat and tie all the time he was in the office, and he would be soaking wet, and the wind blowing, the fans blowing, and rocks on papers on his desk for weight to hold them down. All the windows wide open, but he would always wear his coat and tie, and of course I was expected to do the same thing. But and I did. I guess it was a long time before I ever took my coat off in the office.
Were the vast majority of Raleigh's lawyers in downtown Raleigh?
Yeah, all of them, just about all of them were in downtown. We had a few had one or two in Cary and one or two in Garner and so forth around, but yeah, most of the lawyers in Wake County were in Raleigh downtown.
Mm-hmm. Which building were you in? You in Wright-Dixon in downtown?
We started out in the Raleigh building, and then we went later down to the Durham Life Insurance building. And of course now our firm is in the 2 Hanover Square, on the 25th floor up where the clouds get you.
That's right. I guess that Durham Life building is now the Wake County building, office building.
Next to the courthouse.
Next to the courthouse.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Now, at some point, the bug got in you, and you decided to run for the North Carolina Senate. What motivated you there?
I really don't know. I'd always wanted to go to the legislature, but I never thought I would get time to do it or even think about taking the time to do it. But all of a sudden in 1963, I decided that I was going to run for the state senate. And I went down and signed up, and then I went home and told my wife, and she said, "You're crazy." And I said, "No, I think it's time for me to do that." Anyway, I got into that race, and I had people like Bill Inlow, who was former mayor of Raleigh, was a candidate, Giles Coggins, Acres Moore, Walter Rand from down in Garner, and I really thought I had a right good group of people to run against, and so I got into the race, and fortunately there was a little rift between Inlow and Coggins, and they kind of were fighting each other, and I ended up leading the tickets, so I felt pretty good about it. You have to be careful. An election is probably the biggest ego builder in the world, and whether it's a little election or a big one. And you get to thinking you kind of walking on water almost. But that's the biggest handicap that you have to overcome, and you have to overcome that pretty quickly.
Well, Ruffin, one interesting thing about that time, the transition was being made from the legislature meeting in the state capitol to the transition to meeting in the new legislative building that Edward Durrell Stone designed. And just wonder your perceptions and your observations about the transfer of the General Assembly from the 1840 Capitol to the 1963 legislative building.
Well, it did a lot for the legislature. It increased its efficiency tremendously. The committee meetings had to be held around town in various places. Utilities committee, for instance, would meet in the Utilities Commission. Insurance committee would meet in the insurance building and so on, but it was very inefficient. And of course, the congested area in the Capitol for the House and the Senate, it was almost impossible to do the kind of work you had to do. It did increase the efficiency of the legislature quite a bit, because you had your meetings right there, you had everything right at hand. It was a big transition and a very successful one. I thought that our legislature at that time was probably one of the best in the country. I never will forget, we had a speaker from California who was chairman of their executive committee of the legislature that looked after perks for the legislators. And he looked at our facility and he says, "You've got a nice place to meet, but it's not totally inadequate. You should have a private office with a reception room, and you should have an office in your district." And says, "And your pay is inadequate." Says, "You're in a high-risk business." And I never will forget Tom White saying he didn't realize we were in a business, that we were in a service business, but not in business for profit. But that was a slap in the face to him because he was one of the leaders in getting that new building. And of course it was a very, very good addition to the legislature.
Well, how was it with a citizen legislature like we have in North Carolina? How did you coordinate the practice of law and getting food on the table with your service to the citizens of North Carolina in the Senate?
Well, I went to work early and stayed late, and I had Bo McDonald, was law clerk in our office at that time, and he would come every morning and bring my mail from the day before, and I would go over it and tell him what to do with it, and then he'd bring it back the next morning and I'd sign it and send it out. But I was able to carry on some practice while I was there, but not anything that would interfere with the legislature, because I never missed a committee meeting, and I never missed any day at the legislature.
Mm-hmm. What advice would you give to young lawyers today about whether it would be good for their career to go into, as lawyers, to go into the legislature?
Well, I would say that it was one of the best things that I ever did for me. I think I worked harder. I think I did more good. I think I had a reward and of self-respect and self-esteem that was worth every bit of it. And I think it would be a good thing if there would be more people that would participate in the political side of life today, because we're leaving it now to those who either have enough to live on or have no jobs, and this is a job they can fill, and the pay is now enough so that they can survive. Back then, our pay was $1,800 a year, and we had some per diem, but we started having long sessions about then, and that's been the thing that's hurt the legislature more than anything else, is the length of the session. And people don't feel like they can give the time. But if we could go back to the citizen legislator and have that kind of atmosphere for considering the laws and so forth, I think we'd all be better off.
Now you became really well known and well respected for your role as a lobbyist after your time in the legislature was out. And I read in the article that I think Phil Kirk of Citizens for Business and Industry wrote that you had a maxim that you carried around with you, and you gave it out, that, quote, "No man's life, liberty, or property are safe while the legislature is in session," end quote. Comment on that, if you will.
Well, somebody put out a little plaque thing that said that, and it was a good reminder, because when the legislature's in session, anything can be introduced. I don't care whether it's got merit or no merit, whether it's important or not. If it's some wild idea, it can be introduced as a bill. And of course, they've got to be weeded out and worked out. But your life and liberty and everything you have is dependent on the actions of the legislature. And fortunately, we have a disciplined enough legislature that we haven't gone too far afield, but it seems to be getting a little worse today.
Now, one of the things you worked on as the lobbyist and leader of the insurance lobby and lobbyist for the American Insurance Association were things dealing with the tort system and so forth. Comment on some of the battles that went back and forth on those kind of issues when you were doing the lobbying down at the legislature.
Well, we had the famous John Ingram as Commissioner of Insurance, and he was always introducing something that was sticking to insurance companies, and it was always vindictive, sort of. And I think he knew that a lot of it was trash, but he had the nerve to introduce them anyhow. And it was interesting. We had some good fights, and we got so that we were almost personal enemies. But then came Jim Long, and after John Ingram, and Jim got a little bit better at doing things. He didn't do them just because he thought it would be a political thing, but he did it because he thought it was going to be popular. And we had a lot of fights over the rate system and the classification of drivers and all of that business, things that you're very familiar with. But we finally had a pretty good session with, and we brought up comparative fault. I think the greatest victory that we've ever seen in the legislature was the victory that we had in that, where we kept the system that we have. The comparative fault was a way to get everybody to recover something, and we came up with a substitute bill that was totally fair, and nobody could fight it on the fairness of it. And the House tried to do it after the Senate passed it. They tried to fight it, and we ended up with almost a 2-to-1 victory in that fight, and it was the best unified effort of any lobbying group I've ever seen. And I was real proud of it, because everybody did their job. Everybody saw the people they were supposed to see, and we had a perfect count. We counted votes that morning. We had enough to win, and we were very, very happy.
Now, you were aligned, I believe, in that time, doing the work on behalf of insurance companies with the various businesses in North Carolina. Who were some of the other participants in that, and other industries and other lobbyists that you worked with in that period?
Well, we had people that weren't considered lobbyists, like Bill Womble from Womble Carlisle, and representing Reynolds, and we had a lot of people with Reynolds Tobacco Company that were working with us. We had a lot of the small business groups were with us, and a lot of the people that did business in North Carolina was very, very strong in favor of keeping the system that we have, and so it was a group of lobbyists and non-lobbyists, and those non-lobbyists were more there for research and stuff. In fact, we had a meeting with the members of the House that were against the bill, or that were in favor of the Senate bill but against comparative fault. And we had lawyers that had no lobbying experience to present the research on it, and it was very effective. I know I had only one tussle in that bothered me, and somebody suggested that we ought to let that bill pass the Senate and then kill it in the House and kill both comparative fault and this new concept. And I said, well, if you're going to do that, I'm leaving right now. And I thought about half or more than half of the group would have walked out. So we decided that we weren't going to do that, that we were going to stick with what was sold to the Senate, and the Senate was sticking fast with us, and I wasn't going to let them be deceived by us doing something else.
What would you comment on the role of competition? I think you referred to that earlier when you were talking about how there was deregulation of the transportation industry that had been heavily regulated by the Utilities Commission. There's still a huge amount of regulation of the insurance industry, but give me your thoughts on the role of competition in society.
Well, I've always been one that felt like free competition would always bring a better product, and I feel that way today. I feel that insurance ought to be competitively rated. It ought to be competitively sold and purchased. Now the system is one where you've got an unwilling buyer and an unwilling seller, and it's just not a very wholesome situation. I think deregulation of the insurance industry would bring about a lot of reforms that are needed. I also think that the industry itself would have to be more responsible, or at least assume much more responsibility, because they have to be able to stand the test of true competition, not just gimmicks that would take advantage of anybody. Okay. But I feel like a competitive system would be much better in the insurance field.
Okay. Ruffin, gonna shift gears on you here. I think our viewers would be very interested in hearing your just your observations about your experiences in the Second World War. Tom Brokaw, the newscaster, has written that book about the greatest generation, and you're certainly a wonderful member of that generation. When you saw the clouds of war developing, you were in the service actually before Pearl Harbor, were you not?
Yes, I was. I've graduated on a Saturday night, and I went down to Fort Bragg on Monday morning, signed up for the Air Force, the old U.S. Army Air Corps, it was called then. And I came home and I had a draft notice, so that was one of the motivations. I knew I was ripe for the draft, and I knew that it could come any day, and it did come the first day I was eligible. Anyway, I went into the U.S. Army Air Corps and went through cadet training, and in March of 42, I received my commission and my wings, and I ended up in a group of instructors. The whole class ended up going to schools to instruct, to teach flying. And I was fortunate enough to go to an advanced flying school and teach gunnery and a lot of other things that we did with single engine aircraft then. I didn't get into motored aircraft until about it was about 2 years after I'd been commissioned, and I went to 4-engine school and ended up flying B-24s, and I think Roosevelt had Madam what's her name?
Chiang
Kai-shek visit, and she talked him into sending a bunch of pilots and airplanes over to China, to India, to fly supplies into China and supply all of our Air Force and a lot of their people over there. So I was sent with a whole crowd of former flying instructors who had just finished 4-engine school and sent to India. They sent more pilots than they did airplanes, and we, of course, had to fight to get our flying time in. We were supposed to fly so much every month to get paid, and we had to fight to get our flying time in for about 3 or 4 months. Then finally it got so that we were flying almost every day. I know the last month and a half I was there, I flew almost every day, at least 5-6 hours over the hump and testing airplanes. But it was a great experience. A lot of good people was everybody was in the service. Everybody wanted to get in the service. It was a different kind of war than any other that you've seen since. The whole country was at war, and you felt like you were doing something for the world at that time, and we were. I think if we had not done what we did and had not won that war, we'd all be in bad shape today.
Now, what is meant by over the hump? I've heard that term often.
Well, it was a term given to the route that we took over the Himalaya Mountains from there was a Assam Valley in India was a valley through which the Brahmaputra River, I think, was going through, and we had four different bases in that valley that flew twin-engine and 4-engine airplanes. But over the hump means over the Himalaya Mountains. You had to fly at least 17,000 feet to clear the mountains, and They were beautiful mountains, but they were very, very rugged. And of course, there was one peak in there that was up about 19 to 20,000 feet, and you could see that. It was the only snow-capped mountain in the region. The timberline on those mountains was always up to almost to the top of them, but it was dense jungle and dense area, and if you went down, you had a struggle to get out. We had one crew that took 40-some days to get to home, but they did finally make it with the help of people on the ground that would keep them and take care of them while they were walking through. But it was a slang expression on the flying the Himalayas.
You had an interesting courtship with your bride. Could you just give us a little rundown on how y'all met and how long you courted and how long you've been married?
Well, I shouldn't tell this, but I met her the day I came back from India. She just happened to be in Raleigh. She was from North Wilkesboro, and the sheriff of Pasquotank County was my uncle, and he was up here a few days after, and I said something about I'd like to go up to see this girl. And he said, well, I got some gas stamps. Their gasoline was rationed then. He says, I'll give you some stamps if you want to go. And he gave me some gas stamps, and I went up there. And we had about 3 days courtship. And after the third day, we decided we'd get married, and this was in September, and we were going to get married in January. And so I got married the 18th of January, and I ended up being AWOL when I got married because I had my leave set up, and my CO came back from a meeting at the base, says all leaves have been canceled, and says you better get off the base and get to your hometown and get married, and I'll send you a telegram. Well, he sent me a telegram, but the telegram got there before I did, and it scared my folks to death. And I think they tried to contact everybody in Washington to get me another leave. But anyway, we did go through the marriage ceremony and went directly back to Memphis, where I was stationed, and I had to go out the next day on a flight to Rome, New York. And I got on that flight and got stuck up in Newark, New Jersey, and with engine trouble. And I finally ended up having to, as we call it, sell the airplane to the sub depot in Newark. Got rid of the airplane and came on home. My wife said I looked so bad she was about to turn me in. But that was 59 years ago, and we've been married 59 years. And I said it's a marriage that was created in heaven, really. And I've never regretted a day of it.
Well, that's a wonderful story,
It
and
is.
we enjoyed seeing her today when she brought you out here for our chat.
Ruffin, you've been very involved in your church. Tell us about that. It's a beautiful church in downtown Raleigh.
Well, I think it's probably one of the most beautiful churches I've ever seen. But I became a member when I was 6 years old with my family.
And this is the Church of the Good Shepherd?
Yes, and I've been an active member ever since. Went on the vestry in 1953 and have been on and off the vestry under the rotation system for years. It's probably the next best thing I've ever done was do the work at the church. I've done some of everything there. The last thing was when we renovated the interior of the church and did a real up-to-date lighting system that used to be so dark in there you couldn't read anything. And about the time I got finished was that I lost my eyesight to the macular degeneration. So I hadn't been able to enjoy what we did, but it's really made a beautiful place. And it's a place that I've enjoyed working, and I thank God every day for letting me be a part of it.
And I know you're proud of your grandchildren, so how about tooting their horn for a minute?
Well, I am very proud of my grandchildren. My son died about 8 years ago when these children were children then in high school and in elementary school. The last of them is in now sophomore at East Carolina. The first one has been out teaching school for 3 years, and she's been very, very happy. She's in Wilmington, and I can't get her home. I want her to come back to Raleigh, but I can't get her to do it. My second grandchild, another girl, played basketball, and she was out at state, but she fell in love with a guy. She's going to get married in April, so she's going to finish school in December, and she'll be 3.5 years in school to get her degree. And my grandson, the only boy, is down at East Carolina as a sophomore. They're all extremely nice children, and I've been extremely proud of them. And my son, the last thing I said to him was, I'll take care of those children, and I hope I live long enough to see all of them successful, and I know I will.
Ruffin, on behalf of the Bar Association, the Wake County Bar Association, we want to thank you for your distinguished career as a lawyer, as a family man, as a church man, and we appreciate your coming in today. It's been a real pleasure for us to talk to you, and we really thank you.
Well, let me say this. I've had probably one of the most rewarding experiences in my life, serving in the legislature and serving as lobbyist and working as a lawyer. I don't know any profession or any calling that anybody can answer that's any greater than practicing law and participating in the political process and being a part of it. I know that I worked harder and I got more reward from just my own self-esteem in the legislature than I could have gotten anywhere. And I would urge people to think about what it would mean to them personally if they could do it again. So I've had a great life, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Great job, Ruffin. That was just
Indeed.
a wonderful job with that.
Hope you felt comfortable.